John Morgan, and welcome to episode 1 of season 2 of the Keep Growing podcast. Ha! Just kidding. Well, on the NPR voice bit. You see, last season, when I started the podcast, I wanted to cover gardening and kind of go through it step by step. And at the end of the season, I asked for feedback, and I got some great feedback on how to change up the podcast and really improve on it. And listening back to it myself, it was really scripted, and that's just not how I am naturally. And as a result of trying to kind of over-script the episodes, it really came out like kind of NPR-esque. And, you know, that's great. I listen to a ton of those types of podcasts. That's just not quite what I'm shooting for here. So this season, look for some changes in the format of the podcast, but also kind of in how I present it. Instead of typing up a full script, right here in front of me, I've got 2 pages here in my notebook of bullet points that I want to talk about. So, let's go ahead and get started with episode 1 of season 2 of the Keep Growing podcast. And I thought this second season, it would be great to start off with talking about some of the garden trends right now. Because garden trends, they come and go over time. And right now, I think there's kind of a trend or kind of a series of trends that I think really have some lasting power. And kind of if you condensed all those trends down, there's one underlying theme, and that's reconnecting with nature. So earlier this year, at the beginning of the year in January, I wrote a blog post where I talked about gardening trends for 2019. That's really where I think garden trends right now are heading. So what are some ways that we can reconnect with nature? First, and this one's kind of funny considering that you're listening to a podcast right now, but the first thing is disconnecting from screens and disconnecting from technology. I spend 8 to 10 hours a day here at work looking at screens. I've got 4 screens surrounding my desk. Being the IT manager, I tend to juggle a lot of different things throughout the day, so I'm constantly bathed in the light of screens, which the average adult spends 11 hours per day looking at screens. And also, on average, we check our phones about every 10 minutes. So there are a few things that you can do to kind of mitigate that. One thing that I do is I use a computer program called Flux. And what it does is when the sun sets in the evening, it adjusts the color palette of the screen to kind of mimic a sunset. So it eliminates that blue light from the screen, which blue light kind of triggers our brains and tells our brain, hey, it's daytime, you need to be awake. So by using a program to filter out that blue light, that kind of helps get us ready for nighttime. And you can also do the same thing on your phones. A lot of phones now, both iOS and Android, have a nighttime feature that adjusts the color of the screen. And another thing is, like on phones, setting it up for dark mode. So instead of staring at a bright white screen, you can invert the colors so you're looking at dark screen with white text. And for me anyway, that seems to be a lot more soothing on my eyes. The next way you can reconnect with nature is to bring the outdoors in. And houseplants are absolutely huge right now. 30% of all households last year bought at least one houseplant. And on Pinterest, searches for houseplants are up 90%. And I love houseplants. I've got a ton of them, both at home and then also here in my office. A lot of times they'll stop by our office here and they'll walk past my office and they'll look in and go, man, looks like a greenhouse in here. My office looks like a little miniature conservatory. And to me, that's just soothing. It's bringing the outdoors in, especially on those cold, dark winter days. Being surrounded by some green, it really helps get you through that. And then the third thing is reconnecting outdoors. The best room of your house, it can be right out your back door. And most of the 2019 gardening trends center around this idea. So one of those is creating a staycation spot. A lot of people are trying to be frugal and save money, and the easiest way to do that is just to spend your vacation at home. And if you're going to do that, you want a place where you can enjoy it. Along with that, creating structures as focal points, whether it's a nice new patio, a new barbecue area, hot tub. Along with that is investing in quality furniture. When I was growing up, my family's idea of lawn furniture was, the old aluminum tubing folding chairs that had the webbing in them that would always get brittle over the years, and eventually somebody would sit in it and just go, right through the webbing. Lawn furniture has come a long way over the last few years. And now you can get stuff that looks like indoor furniture, but for outside, because they've got these great fabrics now that hold up well to moisture, and they dry out quickly. So if you forget them outside and it rains on them, it's not the end of the world. Investing in outdoor furniture is a great thing. Another thing is food in landscapes. A lot of people that live in suburban environments, they don't have a huge area to garden. I'm lucky in that I own an acre and a half, and I've got room to have a nice big vegetable garden. But if you don't have that kind of space, or if you don't want to have to hike, all the way out to the veggie garden, a lot of people are incorporating vegetables into the landscaping around their homes now. And there's a great number of ways that you can do that. And some of them are even decorative. So, for example, using leafy greens like Swiss chard as an ornamental plant that's also edible. Those are terrific ideas. And later on this season, we're going to be talking with someone who actually wrote an entire book about foodscaping. And then another trend in 2019 is giving back to the community through gardening. And again, here in a future episode, we're going to be talking to someone who invented a gardening system that, to be honest, is impacting the entire world. He's tackling hunger in third world countries using this method that he invented that's really pretty much, there's a lot of common sense behind it. And when you look at the process, you kind of go, yeah, why didn't anyone else ever think of this? So that's a couple things to look forward to in the upcoming season. And that kind of brings me to the final thing, and it's keeping it low maintenance. Now, by low maintenance, I don't necessarily mean less work. That's something that, quite frankly, our industry has kind of gotten wrong over the years. We've kind of marketed plants as, plant it and forget it. And gardening's not like that. It takes time and energy to produce a beautiful garden. This is not really doing less work in the garden, but making that work go the extra mile. Instead of low maintenance, maybe we could call it gardening efficiently or something like that. That kind of brings me to what I want to talk about, and that is another gardening trend, but it's also something that I'm experimenting with myself. You see, as I mentioned earlier, I have around an acre and a half, and that takes a long time to mow. Mowing my entire yard and weed eating, edging, trimming, it's usually a 2.5 hour job to do a good job. And a lot of times, I really hate trimming, so a lot of times I'll skip that and just kind of hit the high spots, but still it takes around 2 hours. So something that I'm doing is on the western side of my property, I have this huge field that I was mowing. And basically this year I decided, why mow it? It's kind of dumb to mow this big giant field. we'll just let it go back to nature and see what happens. So what I'm doing, and it is going to take some work, but what I'm doing is creating a meadow garden. And that's a new trend, is no-mow landscapes. Here's some stats that I looked up. Lawns cover 40 million acres in the U.S. They're actually our biggest crop in the U.S. It covers 4 times more area than corn. And it's also the largest irrigated crop in the U.S. It uses 4 times more water than growing hay, which is the next most irrigated crop in the U.S. And here's the big one for me. During the average summer, Americans will burn 600 million gallons of gas to run our old nasty lawnmowers. To me, I just looked at it and thought, why? Why don't I just turn it back into a meadow? So when I looked at my own area that I'm planning on turning into a meadow, it's not a huge area. It's maybe 100 feet by 200 feet square. Well, I guess that's a rectangle. But that shaves off about 30 minutes of mowing for me. So over the course of the summer, that'll save me 15 hours of mowing. And also in that area, what I want to do, it's going to be kind of a long-term process. Sometimes with gardening, you'll start a project and it's not like a weekend project. It's going to take a few years to develop a landscape. So this first year, I'm just letting it grow and see what happens. But I'm also planting a few trees. Planting apple trees and probably a few pear trees. And that way, I'm also going to get some food from this area. But also over the next few years, I'm planning on planting around the trees. I kind of want to make them kind of like little islands in the meadow. So I'm going to plant around them native ornamental grasses, some shrubs, different things like that, because I kind of want to create little secluded areas in this area and then kind of have paths winding through it. But I'm also going to mix in some pollinator-friendly wildflowers that are perennials that'll come back every year. That's another big thing right now is pollinator health. My goal is to plant wildflowers, but also eventually I would kind of like to try to get into beekeeping. So that's kind of on the long-term goal side of things. So this year, I'm planting trees. I'm not mowing. Another thing that I'm looking for is I'm keeping an eye on that area for invasive species. And really, if you think about it, the area where I live here in West Virginia, really the entire meadow is full of invasive species because originally this whole area was forest. And there weren't grasses here. All the grasses were imported by our ancestors after they cut down all the trees in the 1800s. So, yeah, kind of fudging, what an invasive and non-invasive species is here, but that's a story for another podcast. But what I'm imagining for this area is kind of a Shire-esque area. I love the Lord of the Rings, and the Shire, it was a beautiful area. I think in the movies, they really captured it, and, that's kind of what I want to create, a place where I can kick off my shoes and relax and just kind of have a lazy day under the shade of a tree, munching on an apple. Hopefully in 5-10 years, it's going to be beautiful out there. Periodically on the podcast, I do want to talk about gardening projects that I'm working on. Just to kind of give you a perspective. I'm by no means an expert when it comes to gardening. I'm kind of self-taught. To finish up this week's episode, something that I want to continue from last season is a bit of gardening wisdom. And since I talked about meadow gardens, the quote that I have is from an author and poet. His name was William Wordsworth. He lived in the 19th century. And he said, "How does the meadow flower? Its bloom unfold. Because the lovely little flower is free down to its roots. And in that freedom, bold." This gardening season, go out boldly, try new things, and, with gardening, it comes down to experimentation and time. And, well, until next time, keep growing. You can find information about this podcast and other great information online at bobsmarket.com. If you want to get in touch with me for questions, comments, or smart remarks, you can shoot me an email at keepgrowing@bobsmarket.com. Copyright 2019, Bob's Market and Greenhouses, Incorporated. Music by Silent Partner.